extraordinary she was. And one thing that she tried to get me to do was to be a, what do you call it, Melissa? Where you get out, you're introduced to the
Southern hostess?
no.
Debutante.
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 Mother wanted me to be a debutante, and I just said, why? I said, what's it for? She said, it introduces you to society. And I said, I introduce myself to society. Why do I need you again? And she had been in yoga classes, and she said, you'd make a great yoga teacher. Why don't you go to yoga school? So I did. And I'm telling you this because a lot of people don't know that my professions in my life were all the idea of my mother. It's not like I started on the road to weirdness. It was my mother. This is from our dear friend Hillary, who was in the group with Chipper for yoga. And Hillary says, of course I can't stop thinking about Betty since you emailed me about her passing. How can we have a world without Betty? How is that possible? As sad as I am today, I'm also grateful for having known her for so many years. Some of the moments that popped into my head this morning. In Guatemala, Betty and I did yoga together for about a week, just the two of us. I have never had an experience like it. Betty could have made fortunes franchising this form of discipline, which I immediately called Yaki Yoga. From the moment we did our sun salutations to the end when we were in Shavasana, Betty was a running stream of yakkiness, and it was so lively and fun. And then the other one for my cousins who remember Benny Burnside, her memory is, she says, somewhere in Mexico by the beach, maybe Puerto Vallarta, I was 18 or 19, Betty and Kiki and I were in a hotel where Benny was playing the piano. Benny Burnside was a pianist. I have no specific thing to say about this except I remember Benny being so vibrant. A strong 50-ish woman, very much in her prime, enjoying the music, trading quips with Benny, and taking nice long walks along the beach, dangling her shoes in her hands. She owned the Mexican beach life. Mother came to me and she said, dying is really hard. And I said, what's hard about it? And she said, because I have part of me is in one world and part of me is in this one. And she said, I don't want to leave this one because I don't want to leave my little girls. And she said, but I always love a good party and the one here is getting pretty boring. So she said, the best party is in a world I can't explain. So I had that dream. So then recently, I just had this it's not a dream really, but it's kind of one of those experiences that's like it's from a dream. And I was talking with her and this is what this is for. I was just like, everything she was telling me were all of her mannerisms. My mother, who was it who was just saying my mother has such fantastic hands?
I was saying that.
Yeah,
you did.
Yeah,
graceful,
how she expressed so much with her hands. So here she was, and she was expressing to me, and she was just using the phrases my mother really used so much, like, looky who's here, which was great because knowing thousands of people from a hotel business, you can't always remember. But she would go, oh my, looky who's here, and they just feel so special. Looky who's here, and she would say that when one of us would come in the room later, when she was closer to passing. Looky who's here, and then she'd go, it's Mary Lou, and I go, it's Kiki. Oh, it's Kiki, it was very cute. So in this interchange, she was saying, oh, well, looky who's here. And then she just used things that she said, she patted the seat and said, come sit here right by me, which she used to do. Guests, everyone was like, you just come you just come sit here right by me and you tell me all about it. Tell me about your trip. Tell me about, so she said, you just come, sit here right by me.
Anytime you are.
Hello, I'm Ricardo Vidargas, and I knew Betty for most of my life, and I don't remember very much about Betty things in particular, but I do remember things that used to happen when I was young, and we used to go in picnics with the Cervantes and Sonia and Enrique and George and my parents and Pius and so many other people. We used to go to Cieneguita, and everybody was just so into the picnics, and obviously as I grew older, I always was very fond of Betty, and I actually went to school of hotel and restaurant, and when I came back, Betty had bought Villa Santa Monica, and Federico Cervantes was my best friend, and he took over the Villa Santa Monica for Betty, and so it was a lot of fun knowing her and meeting with her not too long ago for her 90th
Amazing.
ninth birthday and whatnot, but it was such a pleasure to have known her.
Thank you.
Bye, Betty.
Well, and I got to know her three daughters, and it was just obvious how their mom had taught them to be adventuresome, strong. They loved each other. They all four ran around together. It was just, I didn't watch her as a mother. I just saw the results and saw her with her daughters and how loving everybody was.
It's always good to be busy.
And the other thing was, she was so strong, but she was so gracious. And I remember, the main thing I remember is Betty sitting at the table at her various comidas, where not only was the food the most delicious in town, but just interesting conversation. She was sort of the grand dame who encouraged everybody to feel comfortable and talk and visit.
Okay, my name is Dory Beach, and I ended up in San Miguel because I met Kiki at a conference. We're both psychotherapists, and one thing led to another, and I was living in Arizona, and when I told her I really wanted to move to Mexico, but I didn't know where, she said, well, don't go anywhere until you go see San Miguel. So I stayed in her mother's guest room with her for a week, and I went back to my astrologer, whom I saw once a year, and she told me that that's what I really should do, but I have to wait and go to. I visited the first time on May 1st, where everybody was leaving, including Betty. And so I was told that I had to come on May 1st of the next year, which was 1999.
Introduced me to your beautiful mother, and I was like, wow.
Sonia and my mother
We're really close, exactly.
Who was Sonia?
Sonia Cervantes was English, Russian, but Russian. Exactly, English, Russian lady that came to San Miguel with her husband, Enrique Cervantes. He was a Mexican painter, but
From Oaxaca.
they lived in Chicago or during the war.
He joined the U.S. Army
Exactly.
and went to the war.
Chicago. For some reason, I think that. But
Yes, maybe yes. I don't know. And they have both. They have two sons,
Miguel.
Miguel was Jaime's
Age and was in my
friend.
class.
And Federico was my dearest friend, and he was the one that was working at Villa Santa Monica with beautiful Betty Kempe, and he introduced me to her.
oh, okay.
one day I went to visit him there, and there she was, and I got introduced to this beautiful lady, so kind, it was like an aura, really magical lady there. And since then, I met her, and then I got involved with her beautiful daughter also, and we're being partners in crime with
If not crime, in time.
exactly,
Partners in time.
with ONG that is being here in San Miguel, helping young students to from the communities, from the poor communities, to get education all the way to university. It's called Mujeres en Cambio, and Georgie is the one that started with it. Yeah.
Federico Vidargas and I were getting married in 1979. My family was in Chicago, and I'm gonna cry. Couldn't be here. We changed and canceled and rescheduled because of my father's illness, and at the end we had to go with our date, and we were getting married at Via Santa Monica with Betty Kempe as our guru and as my stand-in mom. So she took care of me, she took care of the food, she took care of the party, she took care of everything. And when, there were no cell phones, but when the phone rang after the ceremony, Betty found me with the one phone, the phone of the house, because my family was calling me, and I talked to my dad, and she took care of it.
Okay. Hi, my name is Sophie Weinberger, and I first came to San Miguel a long time ago and met the Kempes, and they were always so gracious and warm and inviting us to all their functions and all their parties. And one time, we moved away, and one time we came back, we went to a health spa, and there was Betty. And we said, "How's San Miguel?" And she said, "Oh, it's great. Why don't you come on back with us?" But we didn't live in Mexico anymore, so she was always gracious, and known her a long time, known the family a long time.
Her effort, she basically stated her position in life, and after she finished her engagement as a controller in Detroit for the U.S. Navy, Air Force, I guess. She came back to planning her future and was a recipient of the GI. And she decided she would move on, adventurous person, come to San Miguel based on the offer of the GI effort.
Yeah.
Knew that Sterling was starting school in San Miguel. Still, at that time, had to convince her mother, as an adult woman, that it was okay to come to Mexico. She was an artist. She had gone to art school.
Oh.
Her sister Jean was also an artist. She went to the Art Institute. Her mother made Sterling promise that she would look after her coming to Mexico.
Yeah.
And many stories have happened since then. I don't think she's used it as a opportunity to be on her own. And she came to Mexico, met Sterling, then followed Sterling and his botanical team into Guatemala. And so add on, Sterling didn't want her, but she persisted.
So I'm Betty's grandson, David Bow, Christina Johnson's son, and my memories of my grandmother really are kind of general. I don't have any specific memories. Most of the times I spent with her one-on-one were when I was really, really young, 5 or 6 years old. But I always remember meals. I think one of the biggest things I got from her in my lifetime were meal times and cooking and the value of conversation and cooking. And I really gained a lot from having lunch at her house and just watching her interest in telling stories and hearing. She was a fantastic cook. She wrote a cook.
What did you like that she made so much?
Oh, well, chiles en nogada was one of my favorites, and she made an avocado soup that was fantastic. And I remember one of the really interesting recipes that I had never had anywhere was that she would make beef stroganoff and put mango chutney on top. And she also would make what was the other one? Her lentil recipe, there was a green lentil soup where she would put bananas and balsamic vinegar on top of the lentils. And so this mix of the sweet and the savory and just her whole kind of experimental, adventurous cooking style, I think, really represented a lot about who she was.
She was just wonderful. She and my dad were brothers and sisters, and they were totally unalike in temperament. Aunt B got all the sweet, gracious genes, and my dad, who could be very sweet, but mostly got the temperate genes. But she always adored her older brother, even though I think he probably kind of persecuted her in their young times. And that's about all I got to say, but she was the best, was my Aunt B.
One day I was giving a tour to a whole group of people in my Jade Museum in Antigua, Guatemala, and somebody said, "Wait a minute, is your mother called Aunt Barfy?"
That came from when Kiki and I were about 10 or 11 years old, and the word barf was very much in fashion. And we went with Dad and his wife on a trip to the Grand Canyon, and every other word was barf. My dad threatened to throw us off the edge of the Grand Canyon, and of course we said it even more. Anyway, we all got back to Texas, and somebody was in Dad's office, and he had pictures of all of us. And they said, "Well, what a lovely family. Who are those people?" And he said, "Well, those are my nieces, Barfan, Barfy Lou, and Barfina. That's my daughter, Barfissa, and that's my sister, Barfy Jang." So that's where Aunt Barf, fortunately,
Seen the other morning asked, what brought my mother to San Miguel? Did she know anybody in San Miguel? And the answer was her brother had flown down in a small two-seater airplane in about 1947, 48. To visit a friend who lived in San Miguel, and we were all from Fort Worth, Texas, and this friend was named Jim Phillips, and he had moved to San Miguel after World War II as a GI to go to the Instituto on the GI Bill, and he was a writer, and he wrote some apparently best-selling stories about all the terrible young people in Fort Worth, Texas called the Inheritors.
that was it. And then he wrote a bunch of pot boilers, too.
Yeah, so anyway, so Jim Phillips was living here, and my Uncle B wanted to invite his wonderful girlfriend, Margaret, the mother of Melissa, to go in the airplane with him to San Miguel, where there was no gas, there was no avgas, and there was no landing field, and they were going to fly from Fort Worth, Texas to San Miguel, and there was no paved road even then to San Miguel. So Margaret had to lie to her mother and tell her that she was spending the weekend with a college friend as she got in the plane with Uncle Beverly, and they were flying to San Miguel, and Margaret was sure they were going to die. They stopped in Querétaro to get gas, and what did they do?
Well, wait, first of all, they were flying because they had no instruments. So they were following the railroad tracks. And at some point, they lost the railroad tracks, and they were supposed to stop in San Luis Potosí to refuel. And when they found the railroad tracks and saw the train, they weren't sure whether it was leaving San Luis or it was coming back to San Luis.
Which way to follow?
So I think they decided it was leaving, so they went backwards. But my mother's statement was, I wasn't so much worried that I was going to die. It was more, what will mother say?
She didn't get the dime, but she didn't want her mother to know she'd lied to her.
But anyway, they got to San Luis and they got refueled. They strained the fuel through a felt hat.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
And then they took off and got to San Miguel, and Mary Lou can resume the story.
Well, and chocolate. At age like what, 1.5, 2?
No, you were less than 2.
Less than 2, anyway. So I got my first taste of Coca-Cola and chocolate from my grandmother.
Did you have a favorite between the two?
I don't know. Like I said, I don't remember that. But I still love them both a lot. More of a Dr. Pepper guy nowadays, but whatever. What I wanted to get to though is that I remember catching a fish somewhere here in San Miguel, and we went to Betty's apartment. I think she was living in an apartment.
She was living in Sonia Cervantes, room number 5.
And I remember her making me this fish. And like how cool I thought that my grandmother, this like world-renowned cook, was making me this fish. And I still remember it. I was like 4 or 5. Yeah, but I still remember it. It's not like super vivid, but I remember Jonesy in the kitchen. I remember my grandmother in the kitchen making this fish and putting it on a plate and serving it to me.
And also, when you caught the fish, you were with Sonia Berta.
Oh, cool.
And you got the fish, you and Berta, and showed her the fish, and then you opened all the drawers in her apartment, and you took out all of her cooking utensils, and you said, I will need these. And she was thinking about, had my mother ever done anything terrible to her? And she finally came up with the fact that when she was in the 1st grade, my mother refused to buy her a Roy Rogers set of cap pistols and holsters. That was the worst thing my mother had ever done to her, is not buy her the Roy Rogers cap pistols with a holster. And she said, that's pretty pitiful, that that's the worst thing.
One day I was giving a tour to a whole group of people in my Jade Museum in Antigua, Guatemala, and somebody said, wait a minute, is your mother called Aunt Barfy? Friends of Melissa's who heard my mother only referred to as Aunt Barfy.
Oh, really?
Where did Barfy come from?
Well, that came from when Kiki and I were about 10 or 11 years old, and the word barf was very much in fashion. And we went with Dad and his wife on a trip to the Grand Canyon, and every other word was barf. My dad threatened to throw us off the edge of the Grand Canyon, and of course we said it even more. Anyway, we all got back to Texas, and somebody was in Dad's office, and he had pictures of all of us. And they said, well, what a lovely family. Who are those people? And he said, well, those are my nieces, Barfan, Barfy Lou, and Barfina. That's my daughter, Barfissa, and that's my sister, Barfy Jane. So that's where fortunately, Barfissa didn't stick.
Nor any of the other names.
Yeah. Oh, and she was so good-humored about it. You know, other people would have said, if you say that again, I'm going to hurt you.
I have a story. This is her brother Paul and his wife Christine the other morning asked, what brought my mother to San Miguel? Did she know anybody in San Miguel? And the answer was, her brother had flown down in a small 2-seater airplane in about 1947-48. To visit a friend who lived in San Miguel, and we were all from Fort Worth, Texas, and this friend was named Jim Phillips, and he had moved to San Miguel after World War II as a GI to go to the Instituto on the GI Bill, and he was a writer, and he wrote some apparently best-selling stories about all the terrible young people in Fort Worth, Texas called The Inheritors.
That was it. And
Yeah.
then he wrote a bunch of pot boilers, too.
Yeah, so anyway, so Jim Phillips is living here, and my Uncle B wanted to invite his wonderful girlfriend, Margaret, the mother of Melissa, to go in the airplane with him to San Miguel, where there was no gas, there was no avgas, and there was no landing field, and they were going to fly from Fort Worth, Texas to San Miguel, and there was no paved road even then to San Miguel. So Margaret had to lie to her mother and tell her that she was spending the weekend with a college friend as she got in the plane with Uncle Beverly, and they were flying to San Miguel, and Margaret was sure they were going to die. They stopped in Querétaro to get gas, and what did they do?
Well, wait, first of all, they were flying because they had no instruments. So they were following the railroad tracks. And at some point, they lost the railroad tracks, and they were supposed to stop in San Luis Potosí to refuel. And when they found the railroad tracks and saw the train, they weren't sure whether it was leaving San Luis or it was coming back to San Luis. Which way to follow? So I think they decided it was leaving, so they went backwards. But my mother's statement was, I wasn't so much worried that I was going to die. It was more, what will mother say?
She didn't end up dying, but she didn't want her mother to know she'd lied to her.
But anyway, they got to San Luis and they got refueled. They strained the fuel through a felt hat.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
And then they took off and got to San Miguel, and Mary Lou can resume the story.
So they ended up visiting Jim Phillips. They made it back.
Well, they landed.
So, Chrissy, you're going to tell us a story.
I will. I'll tell it sort of a story. So I was about 15 the first time I was sentient about meeting Betty Jane, because Beverly, her brother, was in the hospital and she was in town, and I met Mary Lou and Georgianne the day before, which was fantastic, and they were worldly and exotic and so unlike my world in Fort Worth, and I was enchanted. And the next day Betty Jane came, and I'd heard about her, and the things that she accomplished were so inspiring and amazing to me, because it was sort of the kind of thing that I thought I would like to do. But when I met her, what was even so much more inspiring was that it wasn't a question of steely determination or blind ambition or rigid disciplined goal setting and checklisting. It was just exuberance for life and cheerful determination and like stick-to-itiveness and just keeping on going. And I remember even as a teenager watching her with her station wagon full of like toilet paper and tuna fish and like that she was going to bring back to San Miguel, and just something about the way she was talking about it, I was thinking, that doesn't seem like the most efficient way to do it. But yet she's doing it. No one else I know is doing that. And the whole rest of the time I knew her, it was like that. Like, she wasn't doing it maybe the most efficient or thought out, that's not the right way to say it, but she just did it. The thing is that she just did it. And she did it with so much confidence,
grace,
all of those things. And the secret ingredient was that she just poured love into everything that she did. So like the Via Santa Monica was actually the first time I'd ever heard the term labor of love, and probably the best time I ever heard that term, because she poured herself and her love into it, and that's why it was magical, and that's why people. So I went to work for her and I'll go back to that's why people. I called her when I graduated from UT in 1983, and I had sort of been doing some catering and some food, and I sort of spoke Spanish, but I didn't have a job, and I moved back to Fort Worth, and I I didn't have so many marketable skills, and I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do, except I really wanted to get out of Fort Worth. So I called up Betty Jane, and I said, could I work for you at the Via Santa Monica? I'll do any job. And of course she said, the first thing she said when I called her was, Chrissy! Like, that was the wage. Is that Chrissy? Just like Kiki was saying, like, that open, welcoming thing. Like, I'm so happy to hear you. That's not what she said, but it was in her, Chrissy. And I asked her if I could work at the Via Santa Monica, and she said no. She said it's really small, it's a small staff, there are no positions. But you could call my friends who own this big hotel, the Posada de la Aldea, and they might let you work for room and board. And tell them I recommended you. I called up Peggy Zavala. I said, Betty Kempe is my cousin. She recommended me. Would you let me have room and board to work for you? And Peggy said yes. So I went and I worked at the Aldea for 4 months. And during the 4th month, it was good that I worked there because I thought I knew Spanish already. I found out when I got to San Miguel I didn't actually. But my Spanish got much better because I was in the hotel kitchen every day working. And I learned the town. And Betty called me after 4 months at the Aldea and said, Susie Williams, who was managing the kitchen and the dining room and having dinner with the guests every night, Susie just quit, and I'm in a bind, and you're in luck. You got a job if you want it. So I went, and it was an incredible leap of faith. I was 24 and very unproven, and Betty just said, come and do this, and it changed my life. I mean, that whole episode changed my life. And Betty wasn't around a lot, which was even more of a leap of faith. She wasn't there to supervise. She was just like, okay, kiddo, like, do it. And Natalie was there, so that made it work. And Natalie was fantastic, of course, and Natalie and I got to be great friends, and I loved her, and I love her. But Betty was in and out during that time, and at the end, the Via Santa Monica was for sale. And Betty would sort of come in and out, and I don't know if it's okay to say this, but late in the time that I was there, Betty came back to San Miguel and she rented a house up high, maybe in Atascadero, I don't remember. Atascadero. And she was terribly, unimaginably assaulted one night. Oh my God. And to my 24 or 25-year-old self, hearing about it, it was something that I could not imagine surviving. And I saw Betty maybe 2 days after, and she was obviously affected and harmed, and she just, that cheerful determination, she just continued that. And I'll stop now because the mariachis are playing and we have to go hear them.